I've been thinking recently about what it is that creates an environment of breakthrough for us as Christians, for us in our lives personally, but also for us as the church and us in our callings and the things that God has for us. And I've been looking at one of the ultimate times in church breakthrough, into Acts, in the beginning stories of Acts, to see the environment and the culture which the disciples were living in those early days as the church exploded and expanded. And I think you can see some really interesting hallmarks that carry all the way through all of the stories in Acts. We're going to focus on one or two, but that carry all the way through the book, which we can think about how they impact our lives, how we live out this sense of culture that enables us to live in an environment where God is breaking through all the time. And there's three things that I think you can see the disciples do from the very, very beginning. And I've been thinking about how tempting it must have been for the disciples after they had seen Jesus die and then had the amazing experience of seeing Jesus rise again, of hearing his great commission, the temptation for them to just run for it, just go for it, just to try and make it happen. Peter try and build the church on his own shoulders, off his own back, but they don't do that. They obey what Jesus asks of them, which is to go and wait. It must have been incredibly hard for them to wait, to sit there knowing this great commission that Jesus had given them, hanging over them, waiting. They didn't even know what for. But I think we see in that one of the first hallmarks of what creates an environment of breakthrough, and that's being hungry. You see, they were desperately hungry for God. And so when we find the disciples at Pentecost, we don't find people trying to do things in their own strength. We find people seeking after the things of God, seeking after Him. We find people who are praying. And they're gathered together in unity, praying and asking God to move. And in that environment, God moves. So today, as we're thinking about our lives, I want us to think, are we hungry? Are we hungry for the things of God? Are we opening the scriptures and expecting them to sing to us? Are we listening to worship and expecting to meet the very presence of God? Are we praying on our knees, knowing that it's Him that does it, because simply we're hungry for Him, because He's amazing and He's wonderful? Are you hungry today? Secondly, we see in the disciples a bunch of people that are really humble. They are hungry for the things of God, but they're also really humble. They don't think it's all about them. Now remember, these are people who have had the best training school in ministry that anybody could have ever had. They followed the Son of God for 3 years. They watched His every move. They learnt on the job. They'd seen some of incredible things happen, and yet they knew it wasn't all about them. If you see the very first sermon of the early church that gets preached by Peter straight after Pentecost, he announces to the crowd everything that has happened. And he says to them, it's all about God. He doesn't point to himself and say, what a great word I have for you, friends. I have this great understanding that I can give to you. He doesn't try and build peterministries.com. Instead, he points everybody to Jesus. He's humble. And we see it again the very next chapter in Acts chapter 3, when they see the healing of the lame man. It's incredible, because all these people gather in and they think they're amazing. They look at the disciples and they want to venerate them. And yet, what do? Again, they say, of course, it is not us. We cannot do this by our own strength. It was Jesus. It was God that did it. They are humble. And for there to be an environment, a culture of breakthrough of the things of God breaking out around us, we have to be humble. We have to know it's in His strength and not our strength that everything happens. I want us to think today, are Are we humble? If we're honest and we really think about our lives and the way in which we operate, are we humble? Do we think it's Him that does it, or do we think it's us? So often, I know in my life, actually when I really look at my heart and the way in which I'm operating, I realise so much of it I'm reliant upon myself. I'm not being humble. Are you hungry? Are you humble? But then thirdly, you see a bunch of people all the way through Acts that aren't just hungry and humble and then sit around waiting for the second coming to happen. You see a bunch of people that are hopeful. They really believe God is on the move. They really believe that every person they encounter and that they meet, they can see a different future for them, one that includes God, one that includes healing, one that includes breakthrough for them. They're hopeful. How about us? Are we people that are hopeful? Or are we people that, if we're honest, we've lost that sense of hope about what God is going to do? You see, it's no good just being hungry. It's no good just being humble. We've got to be hopeful for the things of God to break out all around us. Because then we create this environment, this culture around us of Him breaking in and breaking through. As we hunger for Him, we're humble, we know it's all about Him, but we're also hopeful, believing genuinely that the things we read in the scriptures are going to happen today. So how hopeful are you? How hopeful are you that God is going to do something staggering today? That God's going to change a life through you? That God's going to bring a healing? That God's going to see people saved? How hopeful are you for Him to do things? Because I don't know about you, but I always pray and long for God to be moving. But sometimes I don't take enough time to stop and think about what makes me a person that God can move through. Today I want us to think about being hungry, being humble, being hopeful, to create an environment where we see God do some staggering things. Bless you.